The content of the Tandem Radio program and website is intended for general information purposes only. It's not designed to provide listeners with specific and personal financial, legal, counseling, professional service, or other advice. The views expressed by show hosts, their guests, and callers are their own and should not be construed in any way as opinions of Tandem Radio or the Bridge FM network.
Good morning and welcome to Tandem Radio. This is your host, Glenn DeLakian, here every Saturday morning, now at 10:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, in our new format, 90 minutes of Tandem, bringing you the good news on business, which is what we're all about. We have, for those of you who are tuning in for the first time today, we have two simple guidelines on our show with the concept of bringing the good news of business to you. The first one is that God wants to be involved in your business and your life every day. And there are powerful scriptures in the Bible that pertain directly to your business and can help you on a day-to-day basis. So our goal each week is to point you to scriptures that God put on my heart to help apply those to your business practices. And secondarily, we bring in a guest from a different field each week to talk about not only their profession, but how that may apply to business in general. And our goal with that guest is to try to find some nuggets in what they share with us that you can use on a practical basis in your business come Monday morning. So not only will you get the inspiration of the word here today, but you'll get some wisdom from experience from business owners that hopefully you can apply in your business every day and in the days ahead that'll bring you benefit. So that's why people tune in right here at Tandem Radio each Saturday morning at 10:30 a.m. And again, I'm your host, Glenn DeLakian, with an extensive business background, but most importantly, I love the Lord and what He does for me throughout my life, and I love sharing that here on the radio, on the Bridge FM, and also at tandemradio.com. Don't forget our website, tandemradio.com, just a powerful resource and a place to get great information, and we'll share more about that with you in the minutes ahead. Let's start off with our scriptures this week. We do have our guest this week. I just want to make sure that you know, Jordan Rickards, who's an attorney who's been on the show before, and he's got a lot of news for us today. But let's get to the scriptures first. Psalm 127:1. Unless the Lord builds the house, the builders labor in vain. Unless the Lord watches over the city, the guards stand watch in vain. Matthew 21:43. Therefore I tell you that the kingdom of God will be taken away from you and given to a people who will produce its fruit. And those tie in, I think, well to our title today, which I got from an article that Jordan Rickards wrote and shared with me. Entrepreneurs did build it. And he's going to share with you in a minute where I got that title from. But the title, again, of today's show, it's important to catch this, Entrepreneurs did build it. And again, we're here every Saturday morning at 10:30 a.m., our new time, Eastern Standard Time on the Bridge FM. And I want to welcome once again to our show, he's been on before, Jordan Rickards. Good morning, Jordan.
Good morning, Glenn. Thanks for having me back. I appreciate it.
Oh, no problem. I know you're a wealth of information. We're going to squeeze that info out of you today for sure. Jordan, before we get going, why don't you remind our audience, tell them a little bit about yourself.
Well, Glenn, I'm a lawyer. I have my own practice. I've been doing that for about 3.5 years. And before then, I was a prosecutor for about 3.5 years. I actually might be of interest to your audience. I went to Liberty University, which is a Christ-centered university down in Lynchburg, Virginia. And I went from there to law school, and I've been practicing ever since.
That's great. I take it you enjoy your practice?
I do. There are some challenges, and there are some days where you go home and you say to yourself, why am I putting myself through this? But on a whole, it's rewarding.
That's good to hear. Why go from prosecutor to private practice?
Well, there were a few reasons. The prosecutor's office is very political, and I was there to improve things, and they wanted to maintain the status quo. I was there to protect the community, and I think the powers that be there just wanted me to make them look good so that they could advance politically. So that really wasn't my agenda, and after a while, enough became enough, and I had to go on my own.
Now, as an attorney, are you able to profess your faith in what you do?
Oh, all the time, sure. When I was prosecuting, for example, I had the good fortune of being assigned to the juvenile court to start out with, because there's less at stake there in some sense. And I had a judge who was very pro-life. He ran for Congress. He was a freeholder named Roger Daley. And we did something like 2,000 juvenile cases. And there's a tension, Glenn, between your role as a prosecutor, which is technically to punish people, but also as a Christian, which is at times to show mercy and to be engaged in rehabilitation. And so you have to think, well, what is the merciful thing to do here, not just for the criminal, but also for the victim? And so you really can't do that effectively unless you have a positive relationship with the Lord that you can go to constantly in prayer, especially when I had days where I was doing 30 or 40 cases in a day, and you don't have time to take a prayer break in between. You have to be prayed up ahead of time and the night before so that you're operating in good judgment, because bad judgment had real consequences.
Sure. Well, I'm glad that was able to work out for you. Were you able to share with a lot of the clients?
What do you mean?
You share your faith.
Yes, and I'm usually pretty surprised at how receptive they are to it, and I think a lot of the times it's because when I believe when God brings someone into my life, there's a reason for it. It doesn't happen
Amen.
randomly.
Yeah. That's powerful. You know, Jordan, I know you also like to write, so I'm sure you like to read because you're an attorney, but you also like to write, and that's a unique talent. I like some of the things you've written, and one of the reasons why we're here today is because of an article you read, and that's how I got my title, Entrepreneurs Did Build It. Tell us a little about that article we're going to talk about today.
Well, I got the title from a speech President Obama gave. It was a few months ago, but it still resonates, and he was pandering to his audience, for lack of a better word. That's what he was doing.
Right.
And he was saying, you know, if you've got a business, you didn't build that. Someone else made that happen for you. And those are his exact words.
Makes me shudder.
And he complains, well, you took it out of context. But if you read it in the context, that was what he was saying.
Right.
The reason he was saying this, Glenn, is because, you know, he is a socialist. And I don't mean that in a negative way. I'm just saying if a honest application of what he believes is socialism. And the tension between socialism and capitalism is a tension between the idea of shared prosperity versus earned prosperity. And earned prosperity is very easy to defend. You go out and you work, you should get to keep what you earn. The shared prosperity approach needs intellectual justification. And his intellectual justification is to say, well, look, if you've earned something, Glenn, you didn't do this by yourself. Other people who had nothing to do with you have somehow contributed to this. Therefore, you have an obligation to share this with them.
Right. Anti-capitalism, I call it.
They wouldn't even call it that. They would say this is the purest form of capitalism because they earned it too.
Right.
But you're right. It is an anti-capitalist approach.
So, you know, what do you think the president was thinking? I mean, I think you kind of hit it on the head because that's, I think, the kind of president he is. He was pandering to his audience. But is there a deeper message there?
I think it's not so much as a deeper message. There's a fundamental misunderstanding on his part as far as how wealth is created and distributed. If I can give a brief example.
Sure.
Let's say you and I are neighbors and you want me to build a gazebo in your backyard, and in exchange for that you agree to mow my lawn.
Right.
Well, at the end of that exchange, you and I are both in a superior economic position. My lawn is mowed and you have a nice gazebo in your backyard.
Right.
We've both benefited economically. President Obama says, well, wait a minute, you guys are better off, but that's only because somehow you've cheated a third party who had nothing to do with this exchange.
Right.
Because he sees the world of wealth as being static. In other words, you and I can't gain without someone else getting a smaller share of the pie.
Right.
He doesn't understand that in a capitalist economy, when you produce, the entire pie grows. So I don't become wealthier and you don't become wealthier by stealing from anyone else or shortchanging them, but rather by increasing our own productive capacity.
So does that mean that President Obama doesn't take a salary then? Is that
Right, yeah, that's what it means.
Yeah, he should go that route. You know, it's funny, but to an entrepreneur, you know, this sounds like total foolishness. And you sit there, at least in my mind, and what is that perspective from an entrepreneur? Are entrepreneurs taking notice of this? I mean, are they looking and saying, this is crazy?
Every small business owner I know looks at that and says it's crazy because we know the sacrifices we had to make. When I left the prosecutor's office, I cashed out my pension, and I'd been saving I had about $35,000 saved up. I had about $50,000 to start my practice. And I can tell you, Glenn, that over the course of time, that $50,000 dwindled down to about $3,000. That's the risk you take. 2 out of 3 businesses fail. And I had it planned out, but it came out pretty close because I take contingency cases, which means I'm putting the money out myself, and I have to wait to cash in the cases. And so I took that risk, and I had 2 years where I basically made no money living off my savings. And my question, basically, in writing this article to the president was, where were all those people who were supposedly helping me build my business? What risk were they taking? What were they contributing when I was working 7 days a week?
Right.
Not out of greed, which is what they think, but really just to be productive and to provide a good service to my client and to make a living for myself.
Well, again, I mean, there's also, you have this business perspective, right? And business owners should take heed of this, and I want to talk about that more in the next segment. But what about the average person? What is the average person thinking when they hear a statement like this from the president?
I think you can go 2 different ways, but the average person has to realize that even if you're just working for someone else, first of all, you need to know how their business functions so you can appreciate the sacrifices they've made and you can be a better employee. But also, one of the things I mentioned is that employees are their own business. If you're a secretary, for example, you are in the small business of selling secretarial services to to someone else. And so when the president says you didn't build that, or this, you're not responsible for that kind of success, he's saying that to you also, that someone else is somehow contributing to the labor that you're doing. So an attack on small business owners is really just an attack on the entire middle class, since we're all in the business of selling our services to someone else.
And do you think that the people who are not in business, do you think they're taking that approach, or do you think they're missing that?
I think for the most part it does get missed. I think there's some people have a kind of a vague understanding that taxing and to some extent even demonizing business owners has a negative impact on the job market. That the less money business owners have, the less money they have to hire you and to give you the raises and benefits that you want. But I think there's also an increasingly common misconception that if you or I have something, it's because we lucked into it.
Right.
And we kind of won life's lottery, not because we've achieved and sacrificed and risked, but really just because some detached third party appointed us to be successful.
I find that the harder I work, the luckier I get.
Right.
We got so much more to cover. We're coming up on a break. You're listening to Tandem Radio. This is your host, Glenn DeLake, and in with Jordan Rickards, talking about entrepreneurs did build it, and something that the president said some time ago. Stay tuned. We have a lot more to talk about right after this break. Welcome back to Tandem Radio. This is your host, Glenn DeLake, and again with our new profile of time frame, 90 minutes on every Saturday morning at 10:30 a.m., starting at 10:30 a.m., here on the Bridge FM radio. And we have a whole variety of programming for you in the next 90 minutes. Of course, I kick it off with Tandem Radio, the traditional show, the good news on business, followed up by three powerful personalities that you're going to enjoy listening to, so you're going to want to stay tuned. Dr. James Prudian is up in the next hour, also Frank Congelosi, and also Steve Vorius, all talking about topics that can benefit your business. So you're going to want to stay tuned for that programming and listen every Saturday morning at 10:30 a.m. here on the Bridge FM, and of course at tandemradio.com, where you can tune in anywhere in the world. Tandemradio.com is just such a powerful resource, and you can contact us there at info@tandemradio.com. That's info@tandemradio.com. Send us an email anytime. We'd love to hear your questions. Maybe you have a topic you can think of we could talk about in another show, or maybe you just have a need that's specific to your business. We'll do our best to guide you and certainly pray for your business for sure. So email us at info@tandemradio.com. And of course, you can reach us at Facebook at Tandem Radio. Just type in Tandem Radio. Like us on Facebook, and just check out some of the things we're doing. And feel free to put a post. Maybe people want to hear about your business. Feel free to post it on our Facebook at tandemradio.com. We are here as the good news on business, all about God's Word and how it interacts with your business. And our subtitle for the show today is Entrepreneurs Did Build That, which is a title we pulled from an article written by Jordan Rickards, who's an attorney who's here with us today. Before we get back to Jordan, the scriptures for today, Psalm 127:1, unless the Lord builds the house, the builders labor in vain. Unless the Lord watches over the city, the guards stand watch in vain. And that popped out of me this week. It just reminds me that is something that I think Washington especially has got to get that back into the repertoire to realize, unless the Lord builds this house, in this case our country, the builders labor in vain. And Matthew 21:43, therefore I tell you that the kingdom of God will be taken away from you and given to a people who will produce its fruit. And I think that ties in very well to our article that we're talking about today that Jordan wrote. So Jordan, welcome back. And again, give the title of your article again for people who are listening.
It's called, Actually, Mr. President, I Did Build That.
And I apologize for playing off of that, but that's what we're here for today. So we're going to talk more about that article in a minute. But Jordan, let's jump back to your business for a second. You're in private practice.
Right.
What made you decide to go private? I mean, obviously you came out of working for the prosecutor's office. You could have went and worked for another firm. What made you decide to go private?
I always liked the idea of being my own boss. My father has his own dental practice, actually, one of the largest in the state. He's got 22,000 patients, and he always impressed upon me that when you're your own boss, there's certain freedoms you have. When I was growing up, I used to play baseball a lot. I was all conference back in high school, and my dad and my mom were always at each of my games. Yeah. And my dad could do that because he could take off. There was a flip side to that coin, which was that later on in the night he's at at the kitchen table doing his books there. Right. But there's a certain freedom that comes with being your own boss and not having to answer to other people really in the same way that an employee has to.
Does a law practice have some of the same issues that traditional businesses have?
Oh, sure, they have a lot of the same ones. Making payroll and balancing your books and things that the government, by the way, doesn't have to worry about because they can just tax. But the kind of work I do has unique challenges because, as I mentioned to you, I work on a contingent basis a lot of times. This requires a great deal of risk analysis. You're evaluating the kind of client that comes in. Is this person going to be a good person to work with? How badly injured are they? How long is this case going to take me? How much money do I have to put into this? Because it's all my money going out. And so you really have to be careful that you're taking the right cases and it's going to be profitable.
So, there's unique issues to what you're doing
Sure.
as well. What about keeping up on top of things? I mean, is the law all based on history, or is there a lot of things you got to, continuing education?
Well, we have to do 24 hours every 2 years of continuing legal education classes, which, to be honest with you, don't teach you all that much. The fields are ever evolving, and it's really incumbent upon each attorney to apprise themselves of what's going on in the most recent decisions. Because if you're a day late on a decision, your entire case can just crumble. You're now investing money into a case that's not worth anything anymore, or vice versa. Maybe you're about to turn down a bad case that a recent court decision or a new law says this is now viable.
Oh, right. So you may miss opportunities if you're
Sure.
not keeping up on it. Just like in many traditional businesses, which like I'm involved in technology business, and we don't watch our technology, we might lose great opportunities, and certainly even lose current opportunities because customers will talk to you, and if you don't know the new technology, they might think lesser of you and not call you next time.
Right,
So that's
right.
powerful stuff. Again, things I wouldn't think to apply to a law practice as well. Thanks for sharing that. Let's move back to your article for a second. Obviously, from a business owner's perspective, I think we should be very concerned about how our president thinks, and certainly this article points that out about if you've got a business, you didn't build that, somebody else made that happen. That's a direct quote from President Obama from a few months ago, as you mentioned. What direct impact does Washington really have on small business? I mean, the average guy owns a pizzeria, small whatever. How does Washington, should we put our head in the sand and just keep plugging, or, I mean, is there a real impact on our business?
Well, you should keep plugging. I don't think you should give up.
Right.
But, just to answer that question with an anecdote, George McGovern died recently. He was the Democratic nominee for president back in '72 and actually ran a few times after that, all the way up through 1988. He was a longtime senator. And after serving in the Senate, he actually went to try to run his own small business in Connecticut, a hotel.
Really?
Went bankrupt in something like 2 years. And he said, man, I wish I knew as a senator and as a presidential candidate the struggles and the challenges concomitant to running a business that I know now, because I would have been a much better senator back then. He went out of business because of all these different regulations. He had a small hotel, but the fire code, which was really built for bigger hotels, applied to him, and he had to make all these expenses. He had a few frivolous lawsuits he had to defend, which he won, but there's still a cost to winning. He had all kinds of payroll challenges because the government imposes new costs on our payrolls all the time. He had to hire people just to understand the tax code, which he had helped create.
Right.
You know what I mean? So the idea that what government doesn't have negative impacts on business when they increase regulations and they increase costs on us just doesn't stand up to any amount of scrutiny. And that's a lesson that George McGovern learned the hard way, and a lot of us, have had to learn the hard way also.
I wonder if he would have run as a Republican.
Yeah, right, yeah.
Knowing all the challenges. It kind of gets me because perfect example is our current president, unfortunately, has no experience of any kind in anything. I can't really understand, except maybe law or whatever. But I don't understand. I always felt that if a politician didn't have some type of business background, they really didn't know the streets well, and they didn't know what was going on to run a greater enterprise like the government. So I never understood that, why people... I mean, there's literally career politicians, right?
Right. Well, you might remember during the campaign when his business acumen was being called into question in greater detail by Mitt Romney, who was a businessman. He said, well, maybe one of the things we can do is have a secretary of business, an entire business department. And I thought, we already have that. It's called the Secretary of Commerce.
Right.
And the person he appointed to become the Secretary of Commerce has no business background. So, this is the problem. It's the blind leading the blind.
It's amazing. So what does a small business owner do to combat all these situations? What can we do as individuals? And let's just talk from a business perspective. I think a business owner has more clout than they realize in many cases.
Right.
They certainly are people of influence, or they wouldn't own their own business, even if it's one or two people they work with. How can they take a direct role in impacting or counteracting some of these things that are coming out of Washington?
I think they have to make their voices heard. I think they have to do radio shows like this one. I think they have to become involved in politics. I think they have to, even if they don't want to do that, call their elected leaders. I think a lot of it, though, Glenn, has to be education. I really think we should start lobbying for business classes to be a required part of every high school curriculum, because kids are graduating not having a clue as to how to make it in the business world, much less how to start their own businesses and take an idea and turn it from an idea into a concept, and turn it from a concept into a business that will actually generate jobs and wealth for other people.
Actually creating something from nothing.
Exactly.
Kind of like what God did, right?
Yeah.
And that's why I say, this Psalm 127:1, unless the Lord builds a house, the builders labor in vain. Unless the Lord watches over the city, the guards stand watch in vain. Jordan, I want to thank you for coming in today. I know there's so much more in your article. If you don't mind, we'll be glad to post that on our website so people can read about it and also contact you through our website. Thanks again for coming in.
Thank you, Glenn. My pleasure.
No problem. Tandem Radio here every Saturday morning, now at 10:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Don't forget, tandemradio.com is just a great place to go for information. You can contact Jordan through there. There'll be a link to his website there. And also now you can see some of his writing there as well. You can also see my business column there that comes out every month. It's published throughout the area in many counties. I think we have about 66,000 readers now, which I'm pretty excited about, as my publisher tells me. And so much more, archive shows and just powerful information about all that's going on here at Tandem. Don't forget, Tandem is expanding in all different directions. We're now a 90-minute segment here every Saturday morning, including show topics from people like Steve Boreas and Dr. James Prudian and Frank Congelos. And we also have now Tandem Network. You want to check that out, the Tandem Business Network, meeting every month, and may have one right near you. So you can check that out by going to tandemradio.com. And you can even ask your questions there at info@tandemradio.com, info@tandemradio.com. Don't forget, Ask Tandem. Cooper Ford, Ask Tandem at YouTube. Just go on YouTube and type in Ask Tandem, and you'll see some great video programming that I know you'll enjoy. It's powerful and will move you along in your business career. Thank you for tuning in this week. We'll be back here next Saturday, 10:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, right here on the Bridge FM.